Hi and welcome to another tutorial on 2D game design in Unity. In the previous tutorials we've been setting up this scene here in Unity for a 2D game, and we've also started some scripting so that we can allow this ball to collect points when it hits a coin and to make the coin disappear as well. And later on we're going to work a little bit more with scoring and displaying the score on the screen and being able to take points off the score as well, in addition to being able to gain points. So we'll look at that a little bit later on. But what we're going to do in this tutorial is look at how to actually move our player around. So we're going to start working with keyboard input and being able to press keys on the keyboard to move the player left and right. Okay, and in this example, the player will be this ball sprite. Okay, so we'll be moving the ball left and right so we can collect coins and move around the level. Okay, so to get started, we need to create a script. So I've already got this folder here called scripts. So we'll just double click to go in there. And there's our coin script from one of the previous tutorials. So I'll right click here, click on create, and we'll make another C# script. Okay, and this one will be called player controller because it's going to be responsible for controlling the player's movement. So all one word, and I'll start with uppercase P and lowercase c, so we can see it's two words there, but we're not going to have any spaces in this the name of this script. So make sure there's no spaces, and now we can go ahead and edit this script. But before we do that, we might actually drag it onto the asset that will be using it, which is going to be this ball sprite here. So two ways we could do it. We could just click and drag and drop it over here on the ball sprite, or we can also click and drag and drop it over here where it says add component. Okay, and now we can see the player controller script is there. So it's attached to the object which is going to be the player in this game. So we'll be moving this ball left and right. Now we can just go and double click on that script, which will open up MonoDevelop, and we can start coding. Okay, so here we have our player controller script, and we've got all of the default stuff here, like using Unity Engine and system.collections. We've got the class, and we have the start and the update method. So what we need to do first inside this player controller class is set up some variables. So first variable that we'll create is going to hold the speed value, so speed at which this player will move left and right. And that's going to be a public variable that we can access both here in MonoDevelop, where our code is, and also inside the Unity editor. So it's a public variable, so we'll write public. It's going to be a float. So in the previous scripting tutorial, we created a variable that could hold the score value, and score is always a whole number, doesn't have any decimal places, so it was of the integer data type. But for speed, we are going to be working with decimal places, potentially, so it needs to be of the float data type, which can hold numbers with the decimal place. We'll call it speed, and we'll also give it an initial value, and we might make it 5, okay? And whenever we work with float values, if we're creating a variable and we're giving it a value or changing the value, we need to put an F at the end of that value. So F standing for float. All right, we'll create a private variable, which will be another float, and this will be called movement, and we'll have a look at this in a minute. And we'll give it an initial value of 0, and remember to put F on the end there. And we'll make another private one, and this is going to be rigid body 2D type. So we'll say rigid body 2D, and we don't need the equal sign for this. We're going to give it another name that we can just refer to in this code, which will just be rigid body lowercase r uppercase b. Okay, so we don't need to refer to rigid body 2D, we just refer to rigid body. Okay, then we'll go to the start method. And what we need to do when this game begins and when this script loads, the first thing we need to do is actually get the rigid body 2D component from whatever this script is attached to, which is the ball sprite. So if we go back to Unity, we go to this ball sprite, it has a rigid body 2D, which is going to be responsible for the physics and movement of this ball. So we need to actually access that rigid body 2D component in the code. So what we'll say is we'll grab that rigid body variable. We'll say rigid body equals get component, and then in sharp angle brackets, rigid body 2D, close that bracket, and then open and close normal brackets, and end that line with a semicolon. So now, whenever we want to work with the rigid body component, all we need to do is say, or just refer to rigid body, just that one word there. So we don't actually need to refer to get component, rigid body 2D. We just need to say rigid body there. It's typed as one word, and that's it. And we need to access this component at the beginning of the game, so it's in the start method there. Now what we need to do, every frame of this game inside the update method, every frame we need to find out what the movement actually is. So whether the player is stationary, whether the player is moving left on the horizontal axis, or whether the player is moving right on the horizontal axis. Now we could find out this, we could find out maybe what character, what key the player is pressing on the keyboard, so whether they're pressing like the left arrow or the right arrow, and then we could move the character or player based on what key is being pressed. But we don't actually have to do that in Unity, because Unity has what's called the input manager. So if we go back to Unity, we go to Edit, Project Settings, and Input, we have an input manager here, which has, if you click on Axis, we can see we've got horizontal and vertical, and the keys that are specified on the keyboard for horizontal and vertical movement are shown here. So for example, on the horizontal axis, so left and right movement, we have for negative horizontal movement, so moving left on the horizontal axis, we have the left arrow key specified there. And to move right on the horizontal axis, so positive horizontal movement, the right arrow key is specified there. And then we've got alternative buttons as well, A and D. And for vertical, we have up and down and SW. So we're using the A, W, S, and D keys, as well as the left, right, up, and down keys on the keyboard for horizontal and vertical movement. So we don't actually have to, in the code, specify what keys are being pressed to move a character in a certain direction, because it's all specified here. So all we need to do is just get, to be able to move the character left and right, is just get the horizontal axis. So what we'll do is we'll go back to the code, and we'll say, we'll get that movement variable that we created earlier, and we'll say movement equals input dot get axis, and then in brackets and double quotes, horizontal. So we want to get the horizontal axis, and close that, end that line there with a semicolon. So at the moment, we're only working with horizontal axis. We don't need to worry about the vertical axis at the moment. We'll work with getting the character to jump or move up and down in the next tutorial. But at the moment, we just want the player to be able to move left and right in the scene. So this movement variable here will hold negative and positive values between -1 and 1 for left and right movement. So if the character is stationary, not moving at all, the movement will be equal to 0. And if the player is moving left, it will be a negative number down to -1. So if they're moving at full speed left, we've got the left arrow key down, or the A button held right down, then it will be -1. Okay, but if they're moving right, then it will be a positive number up to 1. So if they're holding that button down, it will be 1. So what we can do is we can actually go and check those values right now. Without actually getting the player to move yet, we can just see what values we get when we press those buttons. So we could do a debug log message. So we could show a little message in the console, and we can just output the value of that movement variable. And we can go and save that script. go back to Unity, and we can go and run this game, and go to the console. And don't worry about any little messages there at the moment. But what we can do is we can press left, and the ball is not moving left when we press the left arrow, but we can see that we get, oops, I've got to actually click inside the game here. When we press the left arrow, we can now see that we get negative values here. So it wasn't coming up because I wasn't actually in the scene. I had to click my mouse on the scene. But if I press the left arrow key, or if I also press A, we get negative numbers there. If I hold it down, it becomes -1. So if I hold it down, it either becomes -1 or very close to that. Now if I hold down the right arrow key, it will become a positive number. So if I keep tapping it, you can see we get positive numbers. If I hold it down, we get like pretty much 1 or very close to 1. Okay, and same with D. Okay, so we're just getting a little message here in the console, just showing the values for if we're moving left and the values for if we're moving right. So we get negative numbers and positive numbers. Okay, but we're not actually moving yet. We haven't specified movement yet. So let's go back to the code, and we can get rid of that message now. We don't necessarily need that. What we can do now is there's 2 methods I'm going to show you for moving the character. So first method here is we're going to make velocity equal to our movement speed value. So what we'll do is we'll say rigid body dot velocity equals new vector 2, and a vector 2 is going to store hold 2 values. The first one is for the x-axis, and the second will be for the y-axis. So new vector 2, and for the x-axis we want to make velocity equal to movement multiplied by speed. So movement times speed. So what this will do is it will get movement. So movement is equal to, if we're moving left, it's a negative number down to -1. If we're moving right, then it's a positive number up to 1. So whatever movement is, we'll multiply that by speed, which is 5, and that will be our velocity for the x-axis. Okay, and then we also need to specify for the y-axis. And we're not actually working with the y-axis yet. We're not moving the character up or down yet. So what we'll do is we'll make y velocity stay equal to what it already is, because we're only working with the horizontal axis at the moment. So we can say rigid body dot velocity dot y, and we can end that line with a semicolon. We can save that, and then we can go back to Unity, and we can go and run this. And now what I'll do is I'll move left, I'll move right. So I'm pressing the right arrow key now. I'm pressing the left arrow key, and we can do that again with D to move right and A to move left. So this works. Okay, and you notice when I press, so now I'll stop pressing any keys on the keyboard. As soon as I stop pressing keys, it just stays there wherever it is. And also notice it doesn't really roll down the hill like it did before. So before we added this code, the ball would drop down these planks and roll along the grass. But at the moment, while I'm not pressing any keys, it is rolling, but really, really slowly. So it only actually moves properly when I press one of the keys. Okay, so that's the first method. And the reason why it's doing that, the reason why the ball, I'll just show that again. The ball kind of lands there, and instead of rolling down quickly and rolling down here and collecting the coin, it's just kind of moving really slowly. The reason why that is because if we go back to the code, every frame, so every time this update method is called, every frame, movement is equal to input.getAxis horizontal. So movement, while none of the keys are being pressed, movement is going to be pretty much 0. All right, it should be 0. So velocity is going to be equal to also equal to 0 on the x-axis. Okay, because movement, if it's 0 and it's multiplied by speed, well, 0 times 5 is 0. So it's not actually really going to be moving. So the only reason why it's moving a little bit is probably because the gravity settings on the rigid body are making it move a little bit. But what we can do is we can make this player move only when the keys are being pressed. So we can make the character move left and right only when we know that the keys are being pressed to move it left and right. And so we can keep, we can basically not affect the movement or like of the ball, making it move around, fall down these planks until the keys are being pressed. So we can do that with some if statements. So let's go back to the code. And what we'll do is we'll keep this line here, but we'll put it inside an if statement. So we'll say if, and then in brackets, we'll specify a condition here. If movement is greater than 0, and remember it's a float, so we need to put F. If movement is greater than 0, and we can put a curly bracket here, and a curly bracket here. And what that will do is basically we'll set up the condition here. So if movement's greater than 0, then whatever's inside these curly brackets will occur. So basically if movement is greater than 0, it will move right. Okay, so it will move only if the right arrow key is being pressed or the D key is being pressed. And then what we can also say is else if movement is less than 0. Okay, and again we need some curly brackets here. Just move that down a bit. We can go and copy that code. It's exactly the same. We can put it in there. And so now we can say if movement is less than 0, then move it as well. So it's only moving right if movement is greater than 0. It's only moving left if movement is less than 0. In other words, it's only moving if the movement value is not equal to 0. Okay, so if one of those keys is being pressed. So let's save that code and go back to Unity and run this. And now you can see that the ball is able to roll down. We've got gravity going on, we've got this ball moving down slopes. But if I press left, it can move left. If I press right, it can move right as well. Okay? So we've got our player movement here with the keyboard, but we can also allow the ball to move freely on its own according to gravity and different forces there, okay? So another thing that we can do is if we go back to the code, if we don't want this ball to really move at all when none of the keys are being pressed, then we can also do that with code. And we can just say else, and then some curly brackets here. And I kind of like all of my if and else statements on separate lines, so I'll just make some room there. So we can say else, and then we can say rigid body dot velocity equals new vector 2, and then we can say 0 for the x-axis. So it's not going to move at all on the x-axis if no keys are being pressed to make it move. So we can say 0, and then we can just keep velocity for the y-axis, whatever it is already equal to. So rigid body dot velocity, and just make sure that you change that back to what that's meant to be. If it auto corrects it to something else, just make sure that rigid body is exactly how it's meant to be, because we created this variable up here with lowercase r and uppercase b. So make sure it's that. Dot velocity dot y. And you might also want to just, to prevent the autocorrect happening there, maybe call this something else like my rigid body or player rigid body or something like that. Anyway, that's what it is now. So we'll save that, go back to Unity, run this, and it's kind of back to how it was before. So it's not moving at all really, unless a key is pressed like I'm doing now. So left and right are pressed, and then when nothing's pressed, it kind of comes to a stop and doesn't move. All right, so that's basic player movement in Unity. Couple of different ways that you can do it there. So a really simple method, and then another method using if statements to detect movement. But that's basic player movement in Unity with not really a lot of code there. In the next tutorial, we're going to look at how to make the player jump. Thanks for watching.